Myth 9 says that every inconsistency means the official version must be false. And that trap trips up a lot of people. Real life isn't a perfect storyboard. Notes get lost, memories blur, and experts revise their thinking as new facts come in. Think of a recipe missing one ingredient or a GPS route showing a detour. These gaps don't prove the dish or the map is fake. They just reveal hiccups in the process. In this video, we'll unpack a simple way to read those gaps. Do they appear as a single hiccup or as a pattern across many sources? Do they point to a solid alternative explanation or just louder noise? We'll drop in everyday examples and a sprinkle of humor to keep it clear, then give you a practical checklist to tell when an inconsistency deserves a closer look and when it doesn't. If you've ever felt pulled in by dramatic mismatches, this will give you a steadier footing to think, not to panic. Defining the myth. The myth treats any contradiction in a story about a big event as a sign that the official explanation must be false. It says that perfect alignment of every detail is the only acceptable standard, and any slip proves deceit. In simple terms, if two statements don't match exactly, one of them must be a lie and the whole thing collapses. It's a neat rule for a messy world, like a flashlight beam in fog, clear, bright, and unambiguous, even when the fog keeps moving. A common way this shows up is when people point to two slightly different versions of timeline or a single fact and conclude that the whole narrative is a sham. The myth defines a binary verdict. Consistency equals truth. Inconsistency equals falsity. This way of thinking feels comforting. It gives people a quick tool to judge truth without wading through messy details. When life hands you uneven receipts or shifting explanations, the myth promises a clean line. Either the official story is spotless or it's bogus. In real life, though, plans change as new information appears, and people make honest mistakes without malice. Imagine a home repair where a contractor cites reasons for delays that seem different on 2 days. It could be miscommunication, not a cover-up. Or think of weather forecasts that update as more data comes in. The inconsistencies are just new information, not a conspiracy to hide the truth. The myth often rides on rhetorical moves meant to trap people in a binary. Proponents may spotlight a handful of contradictions and treat them as the whole story, while sweeping aside the rest of the evidence. They may imply that any change in the official account is a wink-wink admission of a grand deception. That impulse taps into a familiar bias. Once you suspect a conspiracy, conflicting details feel like breadcrumbs that lead to a hidden vault. The effect can be fast and persuasive, especially when the audience is tired of complexity or frustrated by legitimate uncertainty. A little humor helps here. The more you chase every squeak in a story, the more you end up chasing your own tail. Defining the myth this way reveals its limits. Inconsistencies can arise from simple errors, shifting contexts, or different sources with varying levels of access. They don't automatically prove deception, and they rarely prove anything beyond more investigation is needed. To evaluate, it helps to separate types of inconsistencies. Are we looking at tiny wording differences or fundamental claims about cause and effect? Are multiple independent sources telling the same core story with minor gaps? Or is the core claim itself in dispute? Check credibility, look for corroboration, and be mindful of the difference between a not-perfect explanation and a deliberate cover-up. And yes, give yourself permission to roll your eyes at every misplaced comma while still keeping your critical thinking shoes on. Why inconsistencies seem convincing. Our brains are built to spot contradictions, and inconsistencies stand out. When two versions of a story don't line up, the mind leans toward the idea that something bigger is hidden. In conspiracy theories, those gaps are framed as clues rather than just missing information. A report that changes a detail or a witness who shifts their account can feel like a breadcrumb trail. We tend to fill the gaps with a story that seems plausible, and that story often sounds convincing. Why do these wobbly bits feel so compelling? Because they promise to replace confusion with a neat explanation. When a detail doesn't match, the desire to resolve it can override caution. A single oddity can loom larger than 100 ordinary facts. In daily life, it's like finding a bent key and assuming it must open a secret lock unless someone fixes it. In conspiracies, that fix becomes a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. Think of a news item that mentions two conflicting timelines. The mismatch invites the belief that officials are hiding something. Cognitive biases help the pull feel natural. Confirmation bias makes us notice details that fit our favored conclusion and ignore evidence that doesn't. Narrative bias pushes us towards stories with clear villains and simple motives. The availability heuristic makes vivid contradictions stick in memory more than bland consistency. We also tend to read randomness as a sign of intent. So, a messy, odd detail can be chalked up as deliberate misdirection. A misprint or a skipped step in a routine report might be remembered as a carefully placed clue. Social dynamics amplify the effect. Online, small anomalies are shared, debated, and invested with meaning, which makes them seem stronger. People latch onto mismatches because they're easier to grasp than messy, nuanced explanations. What helps counter this is seeking multiple sources, testing alternative explanations, and looking for pieces that don't merely support the theory, but challenge it too. If a detail doesn't fit the bigger picture, it deserves scrutiny rather than a quick shrug. A touch of humor can deflate the tension, too, reminding us that not every oddity is a secret doorway. Inconsistencies versus evidence. People notice contradictions whenever a story gets complicated. Real life rarely comes with a neat, error-free chain of events. An inconsistency is a slip in the story, not magic proof that the entire account is false. A missing receipt, a misdated timestamp, or two witnesses recalling a scene differently are common bumps. It can feel dramatic, like a suspense movie, but it's usually just the messiness of real memory and reporting. Evidence is something that can be observed, tested, or checked against independent sources. It's about patterns you can follow, not a single odd detail. If you hear a rumor about a big claim, look for receipts, logs, or independent checks. A lone misprint or a single odd number doesn't topple a theory. When many reliable sources agree, that adds weight. If you can repeat a test or verify a result with different methods, that's stronger than a story that looks convincing at first glance. Conspiracy theories often treat every inconsistency as a sign the official story is a cover-up. But people forget that errors exist in many reports even when the main picture is solid. Two versions of a small event might differ because of memory slips, haste, or translation errors, not because there's a secret truth hiding somewhere. The key is to ask whether the overall pattern of evidence holds up, not whether every tiny detail aligns perfectly. A little humor helps here. If your theory requires every single fact to be flawless, you're building on a very fragile foundation. So how should you handle claims that come with gaps? Start by checking the quality of the sources you're using. Separate what's known from what's uncertain, and note where numbers or dates come from. Look for independent confirmation that doesn't rely on a single person or outlet. Consider plausible explanations for the discrepancies before crowning the theory with proof. If the claim rests mainly on pointing to one inconsistency and shouting, it's worth stepping back. In the end, evidence behaves like a map you can trust. Inconsistencies are potholes, not detours, and a good map still shows the road ahead clearly. Limits of inconsistencies as proof. In many cases, inconsistencies arise from ordinary mistakes, from different contexts, or from information being updated as new facts come to light. That doesn't prove a secret plan. People remember things differently, documents get revised, and a simple miscommunication can turn a neutral discrepancy into a dramatic fork in the trail. Life is messy. Relying on a handful of mismatched details as proof that the official story is fake is like judging a book by a torn cover. It's easy to do. A memory slips, a translation changes a nuance, or a summary leaves out a messy middle. And suddenly the whole narrative seems to crumble. But that crumble is not a secret door. Conspiracy claims often try to turn small gaps into a big pit of doubt, using the gap as a stand-in for a complete truth. That tactic isn't proof. Deliberate misdirection can also dress up a missed piece as evidence that something was hidden on purpose. Sometimes it's just bad documentation. To sort signal from noise, check how the inconsistencies affect core claims rather than peripheral details. Look for independent sources. If many sources converge on a consistent core, and the odd mismatches can be explained by error, bias, or context, that is not a slam dunk for a conspiracy, but a sign to slow down and look further. Humor helps too. A practical approach is to ask what would have to be true for the official version to be wrong, and whether that scenario holds up when you test it against multiple, credible reports. Case studies and real-world pitfalls. Many people notice small inconsistencies and treat them as proof that the official story is false. In practice, a few mismatched details almost never topple a well-supported explanation. More often, they point to gaps in information, different perspectives, or honest mistakes. Case studies from everyday life show how easy it is to jump from "this seems odd" to "therefore the whole thing is a cover-up." These pitfalls reveal why the myth thrives on the idea that every inconsistency is a smoking gun. Case study 1 pops up when a company issues a notice about a product issue. A photo or screenshot shows two different labels on seemingly the same item. The spread of the claim is that this proves a deliberate misreport. In truth, notices often differentiate between all units and some batches, or between current and previous stock, and that nuance gets lost in quick shares. The pitfall is that people treat any mismatch as a sign of a cover-up, ignoring the practical reasons behind wording changes. Case study 2 moves into health topics, where people's experiences differ. A patient reports a set of side effects that seems to contradict an official safety sheet. A social post argues that this proves the drug is dangerous or hidden risks. In reality, symptoms can vary a lot from person to person, and rare side effects may only show up in small groups. The mismatch is often about scale and context, not fraud. The lesson is simple. Inconsistency does not automatically equal deceit. It often reflects natural variability and incomplete data. Another real-world pitfall lives in how information is presented to the public. People compress complex investigations into a single sentence and drop qualifiers. Then they conclude the whole inquiry is a sham. A practical approach is to map claims to evidence, ask who is making the claim, and look for independent sources that test the same point. If you spot a contradiction, check what stays the same across versions and what changes, and ask whether the change makes the picture clearer or only spicier. The goal is to separate genuine uncertainty from a narrative built to fill in every hole with suspicion. A calm checklist can save you from chasing every odd detail down a rabbit hole while missing the bigger picture. Evaluating claims, a practical guide. Facts matter. An inconsistency in a story doesn't automatically prove the official account wrong. People recall events differently all the time, and the mind fills gaps with plausible explanations. The claim that inconsistencies equal falsity is a common trap tied to Myth 9. This guide treats such claims with practical nerve, not with heavy theory. Consider a simple workplace example. Two coworkers remember who opened a shared file first, and the memory differs. The file still exists, even if the recollections don't line up perfectly. First, separate the inconsistency from the whole claim. If the inconsistency concerns small timing or wording, it's often not enough to topple the entire theory. Minor timing wiggles happen in real life. They're not a bad omen, just a detail needing better data. If the inconsistency is about a core fact, like who had access to a room or who signed off on a decision, that's more serious. Then check the remaining evidence. Does it align with the official version or with the alternative theory? Are there multiple independent sources telling a similar story? Or is it a single voice echoing the claim? When in doubt, see whether other verifiable details fit both sides or only one. Next, assess credibility of sources. Official channels, public documents, or experts with track records deserve more weight. Anonymous posts or sensational blogs with no backup deserve skepticism. Beware cognitive traps. Confirmation bias makes you notice what you expect and ignore what doesn't fit. Ask if you would accept the same claim if it came from a friend rather than a stranger online. If the answer is yes, the claim deserves closer look. Finally, testability matters. Can you observe evidence or run a simple check that could falsify the claim? If not, its strength is weaker. Consider simpler explanations that fit the facts without a grand, coordinated cover-up. If a claim demands perfect coordination across many people, pause and look for data. Keep a practical checklist handy. State the core claim, note the major inconsistencies, list the sources and rate their reliability, name plausible alternatives, and think about one test you could actually try. So, to sum up Myth 9, just because a conspiracy theory has some inconsistencies doesn't automatically mean the official version is false. Inconsistencies often come from missing information, misread details, or ideas that keep changing as new facts pop up. Think about everyday life. A recipe that forgot to list one step, a map with a detour not yet updated, or a weather forecast that gets tweaked after new data comes in. The presence of a mismatch doesn't prove the whole thing is a fabrication. It just means we don't have the full picture yet, or we're mixing up different stories. If you spot inconsistencies, here's how to approach them without losing your mind. Check multiple sources, see if the gaps are acknowledged and explained, and ask who benefits from the narrative. Look for explanations that address the missing pieces rather than jumping to a conclusion. Separate genuine questions from blanket claims, and watch for anything that's being shoved aside with a loud shout rather than a solid explanation. If you're here because you want to think clearly and not be swept away by every sensational detail, you're in good company. The truth is, our brains love a tidy story, but real life is messy. Conspiracy theories can be like collecting quirky souvenirs. You might enjoy the hunt, but that doesn't mean every piece fits. If this resonated, drop a like, share with a friend who loves a good puzzle, and subscribe for more practical tips on evaluating claims. First, we'll be back with fresh stuff that cuts through the noise. Things like how to spot reliable sources, how to read headlines without panicking, and how to test ideas without turning into a detective on caffeine. Thanks for hanging out, and see you in the next video.